The only thing more dangerous than an idea is a belief. And by dangerous, I don't mean thought-provoking. I mean, might get people killed. Take the Reverend John Cotton. In 1630, he goes down to the port of Southampton to preach a farewell sermon to the 700 or so colonists of the Massachusetts Bay Company. Led by Governor John Winthrop, a gentleman farmer and lawyer, these mostly Puritan dissenters are about to sail from England to New England on the flagship Arbella and 10 other vessels in the Winthrop fleet. By the time Cotton says amen, he has fought Mexico for Texas, bought Alaska from the Russians, and dropped napalm on Vietnam. Then he lays a wreath on Custer's grave and revs past Wounded Knee. Then he claps when the Marquis de Lafayette tells Congress that someday America will save the world. Then he smiles when Abraham Lincoln calls the United States the last best hope of Earth. Then he frees Cuba, which would be news to Cuba. Then he signs the lease on Guantanamo Bay. Cotton's sermon is titled God's Promise to His Plantation. He begins with one of the loveliest passages from the book of 2 Samuel, an otherwise R-rated chronicle of King David's serial killer years. Chapter 7, verse 10.
I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and I will plant them, that they may dwell in a place of their own, and move no more.
It sounds so homey, like that column in the real estate section of the New York Times about how people found their apartments, until I remember that talk like this is the match still lighting the fuse of 1,000 car bombs. What Cotton is telling these about-to-be Americans is that they are God's new chosen people. This they like to hear. In fact, they have been telling themselves just that. The Old Testament Israelites are to the Puritans what the blues was to the Rolling Stones, a source of inspiration, a renewable resource of riffs. What Cotton is telling them is that, like the Old Testament Jews, they are men of destiny. And, like the Old Testament Jews, God has given them a new home, a promised land. And, like the Old Testament Jews, God has printed eviction notices for them to tack up on the homes of the nothing special, just folks who are squatting there. It's fine, according to Cotton, to move into
a country not altogether void of inhabitants,
if said country is really big. After all, he continues,
Abraham and Isaac, when they sojourned amongst the Philistines, they did not buy that land to feed their cattle, because, they said, there's room enough.
This is God's plantation, remember? Cotton says,
if God be the gardener, who shall pluck up what he sets down?
Hear that, Indians? No weeding of the white people allowed, unless they're Catholic, or one of those Satan-worshipping Virginians.
This is a tiny taste of the book Wordy Shipmates by Sarah Vowell. I read it because I love Sarah Vowell and history. I included it because it changed a belief system I had. I believed in the Brady Bunch version of the round-headed, buckle-hat-wearing Puritans. Wikipedia cites, The Wordy Shipmates is a 2008 book by Sarah Vowell that chronicles the 17th and 18th century history of Puritan colonists in Massachusetts, United States. The book delineates a dichotomy between the Puritans of the Massachusetts Bay Colony and those who settled Plymouth, Massachusetts. The thesis of the work is that the early Puritans were bibliophiliac advocates of education, thus being wordy shipmates. Hope you enjoy.
little pig, I named her Pat. She wouldn't eat corn 'cause it made her too fat. It's a pig pen boogie, the pig pen boogie. Hey, little pig, you gotta eat to grow big. I paid $1 for a turnip sprout. She took one look, then she turned up her snout. It's a pig pen boogie, the pig pen boogie. Hey, barbecue, I'm losing my money on you. I'm a-telling you, I might as well go on a diet too. It's the pig pen boogie, the pig pen boogie. Hey, barbecue, I'm losing my money on you. Is lean and her chops are thin. Her feet won't pickle 'cause they're nothing but skin. It's the pig pen boogie, the pig pen boogie. I want a sow who likes to gobble her chow. I'm telling you, I might as well go on a diet too. It's the pig pen boogie, the pig pen boogie. Hey, barbecue, I'm losing my money on you. Hey, barbecue, I'm losing my money on you.
John Cotton is 46 years old. He is the most respected, famous, and beloved Puritan minister in England. Getting him to bless the send-off of these relatively unimportant castaways would be like scoring Nelson Mandela to deliver the commencement address at the neighbor kid's 8th grade graduation. In fact, once the colonists arrive in Massachusetts, they will name their settlement Boston in honor of Cotton's hometown. These people listening to this man are scared. There's a boat in the harbor that just might sail them to their deaths. They may never see their friends again until heaven or hell, depending on how this dumb plan goes. For years, they've grumbled that England is a cesspool governed by an immoral king under the spell of the Whore of Babylon, which is their cute nickname for the Pope. But now that it's time to light out, their dear old mother country seems so cozy, all warm beds and warm beer and days of old lang syne. Yet here is the smartest man in England, maybe the smartest man in the world, telling them, little old them, that they have been picked by God. They are Israelites is what they are. They are fleeing Egypt. Good riddance. Next stop, land of milk/honey. Now they know. They can do this. They can vomit their way across the sea. They can spend 10 years digging up tree stumps to plow frozen fields. They can even learn to love corn. For the first time in months, they can breathe. Then Cotton quotes Luke 12:48.
To whom much is given, of him God will require the more.
Of course there's a catch, Spider-Man. When God is the landlord, Cotton says,
defraud him not of his rent.
The price? Obedience. Break God's laws and suffer ye his wrath. The Israelites, Cotton warns,
might wrong themselves by trespassing against God, and so expose themselves to affliction. If Israel will destroy themselves, the fault is in themselves.
Great. All this special treatment might get them nothing more than special punishment from a creator who sure is creative when it comes to retribution. The prophet swallowed by the whale, the wife turned into salt. Thank goodness for bees. Cotton points out,
when the hive is too full, they seek abroad for new dwellings.
Keep in mind that most of the colonists fear more than a watery grave or the dark forest ahead or even hell. They question their leaving. What if their sinful birthplace needs them? But Cotton reassures them that England has more than its fair share of Englishmen. He remarks,
"When the hive of the Commonwealth is so full that tradesmen cannot live one by another, but eat up one another in this case, it is lawful to remove."
Here we arrive at the reason why this here tale of American Puritans is more concerned with the ones shipping off from Southampton for Massachusetts in the Arbella in 1630 than with the Pilgrims who sailed from Southampton toward Plymouth on the Mayflower in 1620. Because the Plymouth colonists were separatists and the Massachusetts Bay colonists were not. Before I explain that, I will say that the theological differences between the Puritans on the Mayflower and the Puritans on the Arbella are beyond small. Try negligible to the point of nitpicky. I will also say that readers who squirm at microscopic theological differences might be unsuited to read a book about 17th century Christians, or, for that matter, a newspaper. Secular readers who marvel every morning at the death toll in the Middle East ticking ever higher due to, say, the seemingly trifling Sunni versus Shia rift in Islam might look deep into their own hearts and identify their own semantic lines in the sand. For instance, a devotion to The Godfather Part 2 and equally intense disdain for The Godfather Part 3. Someday they might find themselves at a bar and realize they are friends with a woman who can't tell any of the Godfather movies apart and ask if Part 2 was the one that had that guy in the boat. Them's fighting words, right? Conway, England, 1630. Question. Why is the aforementioned John Cotton standing in front of the aforementioned John Winthrop and his shipmates watering the seeds of American exceptionalism that will, in the 21st century, blossom into preemptive war in the name of spreading democracy in the Middle East that temporarily unites even some of the factions of the aforementioned Sunni and Shia Muslims who hate each other's guts but agree they hate the bully America more? Answer, because Henry VIII had a crush on a woman who was not his wife. In order to divorce his wife, Catherine of Aragon, and marry Anne Boleyn, Henry had to divorce England from Rome. When the Pope, for some reason, refused to annul the marriage vows Henry made to Catherine more than 2 decades earlier, Henry rebelled and established himself as the head of the Church of England in 1534. This was 17 years after Martin Luther nailed Rome's abuses by nailing his 95 Theses to a church door in Germany, thereby welcoming in the Protestant Reformation. Luther was outraged when the Pope sent emissaries up north to raise money for St. Peter's Basilica by selling indulgences, essentially coupons a buyer could use to pay off the Pope to erase sins from the Judgment Day ledger. Luther's point was that, according to Scripture, salvation is not a bake sale. He wrote, "They preach only human doctrines who say that as soon as the money clinks in the money chest, the soul flies out of purgatory." His larger message became the core ethos of Protestantism. The Bible, not any earthly pope, is the highest authority. The Word of God, not a man of God, is the man. For that reason, Luther translated the Bible into German so Germans could read it for themselves, which inspired various international Protestants to do the same in their own native tongues. And in one of history's great collisions, this 16th century fad for vernacular Bible translations comes about not long after Luther's countryman Johann Gutenberg had invented movable type in Europe, making it possible to print said translations on the cheap and in a hurry. So an English subject of Henry VIII, who already had a soft spot for the innovations of Luther, rejoiced at the king's break with Rome, while trying not to picture Henry and Anne Boleyn doing it in every room of every castle. That is, until the Protestant sympathizer went to church and noticed that the Church of England was just the same old Catholic church with a king in pope's clothing. Same old hierarchy of archbishop on down, same old Latin-speaking middlemen standing between parishioners and the Bible, between parishioners and God. Same old ornamental gewgaws, organ music, vestments. It is difficult to understate the Puritan abhorrence of something as seemingly trivial as a vicar's scarf. Same old easily achieved come-as-you-are salvation. Here's what one had to do to join the Church of England. Be English. But we want getting into heaven to be hard, said the Puritans, and not for everybody. So the English Protestants protest. One of their heroes was William Tyndale, who had exiled himself to Germany in 1524 in order to commit the crime of translating the Bible into English. Captured at Henry's request, Tyndale was strangled, then burned at the stake in 1536. His reported last words were, "Lord, open the King of England's eyes." This prayer was answered 2 years later when Henry commissioned the so-called Great Bible, the first official Bible in English, based largely on the translation of William Tyndale. In the near century, between Henry's breakup with Rome and the Massachusetts Bay colonists' departure, members of the Church of England, which is to say, the English, quarreled constantly about how Protestant to become or how Catholic to remain. No surprise that the monarchs and the clergy, at the top of the cultural hierarchy, tended to be in favor of cultural hierarchy and skewed Catholic. For instance, the late King James, son of the famously Catholic Mary, Queen of Scots, threatened to harry the Puritans out of England. So in Southampton, when Cotton promises the colonists that where they are going,
The sons of wickedness shall afflict them no more.
They know he is referring to James's son, King Charles I, and his Anglican henchmen, including the Puritans' nemesis, the Bishop of London, William Laud.
Gonna quit my rowdy ways. Gonna quit my rowdy ways. Gonna lay my whiskey by my side and quit my rowdy ways. I had the sweetest girl in town. I had the sweetest girl in town. She asked me to lay my whiskey down and quit my rambling around. I said I'll do anything for you. I said I'll do anything for you. I'll do anything for you and my dear old mother too. I said I'll do anything for you. Now here is my old guitar that I love to play so well. Someday I will tie it to my side and take it to my home on high. Gonna quit my rowdy ways. Gonna quit my rowdy ways. Gonna lay my whiskey by my side and quit my rowdy ways.
One reason Winthrop and his shipmates are hitting the road in 1630 is that Charles had dissolved the Parliament, the one check on his power, the year before. The Protestant-leaning House of Commons had passed incendiary resolutions limiting the king's powers of taxation and proclaiming the practices of popery and Arminianism a capital offense. Arminianism, the dogma that a believer's salvation depends merely on faith, is at odds with the Puritans' insistence that salvation is predetermined by God. Laud, a portly and haughty gentleman in a puffy robe in his National Portrait Gallery likeness, is pretty much Mr. Arminianism. It's worth remembering that, while Laud is the boogeyman in Puritan history, his more open-minded and open-hearted view of how Christians get to heaven won out in Protestantism worldwide. Which is not to deny the fact that Laud was both a ruthless ogre toward the Puritans and a suck-up to Charles, delivering sermons on the divine right of kings. The subtext of Cotton's sermon to the voyagers is the question, "Can I come too?" Laud becomes more and more powerful and thus more threatening to Puritans. It is no coincidence that 1633, the year Laud becomes Archbishop of Canterbury, is also the year Cotton finally emigrates to Massachusetts, where he becomes Winthrop's own minister. Believers who wanted to purify the Church of England of its Catholic tendencies came to be known by the put-down Puritan. They mostly called themselves nonconformists, or the godly, or, occasionally, hot Protestants. The more radical Puritans who severed ties with the Church of England came to be known as separatists. They shook off all allegiance to grandiose national religion and concentrated on their own congregations, worshipping in plain little meeting houses. Hence the separatists who hightailed it to Holland and then Cape Cod on the Mayflower. Puritans who wanted to reform the Church of England from the inside came to be known as non-separatists, which is to say they came to be simply unhappy. Hence the simultaneously hopeful and guilt-ridden men and women listening to John Cotton before boarding the Arbella, wondering if it is right to be abandoning England at all. I admire the Mayflower Pilgrims' uncompromising resolve to make a clean break, and their fortitude, so fundamental to the American national character that Sinclair Lewis called one of our core ideals Plymouth Rock in a sleet storm.
Tantas veces que te doy mi primavera, si es a cambio de billete y una moto de primera. Sabes bien que protegerte tiernamente y consolera, y es un arte que llegue y no lo tiene cualquiera. Los chulos son para cuidarlo y tú no lo haces así. Los chulos son para cuidarlo, no me tengas porque sí. Los chulos son para cuidarlo y para toda la vida entera. Los chulos son para cuidarlo y ellos cuidarán de ti. Ay, a tu vera, ay, a tu vera para ser feliz. Ay, a tu vera, ay, a tu vera para cuidar de ti. Ay, a tu vera, ay, a tu vera y es mejor así. Ay, a tu vera, ay, a tu vera y hasta para morir. Tantas veces que tú has sido la primera y que todos mis ritos mejores se hacen polvo en tu cadera. No hagas caso de las voces, libre de hechicera, porque en sueños me conoce como al príncipe que espera. Los chulos son para cuidarlo y tú no lo haces así. Los chulos son para cuidarlo, no me tengas porque sí. Los chulos son para cuidarlo y para toda la vida entera. Los chulos son para cuidarlo y ellos cuidarán de ti. Ay, a tu vera, ay, a tu vera para ser feliz. Ay, a tu vera, ay, a tu vera para cuidar de ti. Ay, a tu vera, ay, a tu vera y es mejor así. Ay, a tu vera, ay, a tu vera y hasta para morir. Ay, a tu vera, ay, a tu vera para ser feliz. Ay, a tu vera, ay, a tu vera para cuidar de ti. Ay, a tu vera, ay, a tu vera.
Still, I find the Arbella passengers' qualms messier and more endearing. They were leaving for the same reasons the Pilgrims left, but they had either the modesty to feel bad about it or the charitable hypocrisy to at least pretend to. Maybe it's because I live in a world crawling with separatists that I find religious zealots with a tiny bit of wishy-washy pussyfooting compromise in them deeply attractive. Plus, half the entertainment value of watching Massachusetts Bay come to life is witnessing all the tiptoeing and deference, frequently just a pretense of deference, to the crown. Winthrop will spend most of his time as magistrate tripping all over himself to make sure King Charles doesn't get wind of any of the colony's many treasonous infractions. Because, unlike the Plymouth separatists, the non-separating Bostonians left England pledging to remain as English as beheadings and clotted cream. In fact, Winthrop and 6 of the highest-ranking officers of the Massachusetts Bay Company sent an open letter to the King and the Church of England before their departure in 1630, titled The Humble Request. They beseeched His Majesty and their countrymen
for their prayers and the removal of suspicions and misconstructions of their intentions.
The Church of England is especially cajoled as
our dear mother,
whom they bid adieu
with much sadness of heart and many tears in our eyes, ever acknowledging that such hope and part as we have obtained in the common salvation we have received in her bosom, and sucked it from her breasts.
Cotton will pick up on this mammary metaphor in his farewell sermon, reminding the colonists not to forget England.
The breast that gave them suck.
The humble request is so servile it boils down to this panicky appeal. Nothing uppity about us, Your Majesty. We're just hobos in the woods. To hammer home the image of themselves as unthreatening and pitiable, they remind the king and his bishops,
we shall be in our poor cottages in the wilderness.
In private, however, Winthrop will soon tell his fellow colonists the very opposite. He says,
we shall be as a city upon a hill.
Hello, this is Smith. I should be returning to base about 8:30 this evening.
8:30 this evening. Are you gone literally all day from 6 o'clock until after dark? It's hard to believe, isn't it? Yeah. That's a full-time job. 24 hours of nothing, huh? Just driving the white car around. That's okay. It's an exercise. Keeps your arms. If you don't want to jog, you don't want to be out there running in the streets or on the sand, doing wind sprints. Best thing is to stay in the white car and drive around until you're shot at. Now it's 4 o'clock up here. I don't know what it is down there. Probably an hour difference, hour and a half difference. I know in mileage. It's probably 5:30. So I am coming down tomorrow, and I'd like to get together with you between Thursday and Friday. And on Friday I go to work and do the thing in the cave with the man, Got a call around 3 o'clock, as my understanding from the force. 3 o'clock on Friday, and then of course Saturday I turn around and come back up here. I like to get together and see what's happening here, see what the expression on the face is, and what you're doing with your hair, your body, whether you're squeezing a soft rubber ball to strengthen your fist or whatever is happening. Man, you've got to pull the chain on your mind and pull the chain on your head and flush your mind. Okay? Yeah. Pull the chain on your head, man, and flush your mind. Okay, I've been using that, and it's starting to pick up momentum. Okay, that's about it from here, and that's Wilco and out, I guess. I can't think of anything else. Remember, I'll be back down tomorrow. I'll try to reach you. I don't know, these calls are... I have more money in AT&T, there's nothing coming in as a dividend. It's all going out, but that's all right. It gives a little joy to a man like yourself in an olive drab Quonset hut, right near an airstrip to have a few laughs. So until next time, then, I remain your obedient servant, the Shadow.
In God's promise to his plantation, when John Cotton tells the seafarers before him that their exodus is as natural as a bee ditching a cramped hive, it is an act of kindness, especially to John Winthrop. Not all of Winthrop's old comrades have been so quick with a bon voyage. When he asked his friend Robert Reese for advice on whether or not to emigrate, Reese sent him a churlish warning not to, starting with the fact that, at age 42, Winthrop was too damn old. Plantations are for young men, Reese wrote, that can endure all pains and hunger, but for one to undertake so large a task is seldom seen but to miscarry. Reese added that the scheme would ruin Winthrop's family, and that even on the off chance his ship avoids shipwreck, he'll live across the sea on the Dole, forever dependent on England for supplies. It must have taken all of Winthrop's considerable restraint not to ship Reese a boatload of so-there corn upon Boston's first harvest. Finally, Reese tries to dissuade Winthrop with the wilderness's shocking lack of reading material, carping, "How hard will it be for one brought up among books and learned men to live in a barbarous place where is no learning and less civility?" Not so hard, it turns out. Winthrop and his shipmates and their children and their children's children just wrote their own books and pretty much kept their noses in them up until the day God created the Red Sox. One of the Puritans' descendants, Ralph Waldo Emerson of Concord, embodied the wordy tradition passed down to him when he announced, "The art of writing is the highest of those permitted to man." As the 20th century critic F.O. Matheson would complain of Emerson's bookish bent, it can remind you of the bias of provincial New England, whose higher culture had been so exclusively one of books that it had grown incapable even of appraising the worth of other modes of expression. The United States is often called a Puritan nation. Well, here is one way in which it emphatically is not. Puritan lives were overwhelmingly, fanatically literary. Their single-minded obsession with one book, the Bible, made words the center of their lives. Not land, not money, not power, not fun. I swear on Peter Stuyvesant's peg leg that the country that became the U.S. bears a closer family resemblance to the devil-may-care merchants of New Amsterdam than it does to Boston's communitarian English majors. History is written by the writers. The quill-crazy New Englanders left behind libraries full of statements of purpose in the form of letters, sermons, court transcripts, and diaries. Most of what we know about the history of early New England is lifted straight out of Winthrop's wonderful journal and William Bradford's also wonderful of Plymouth Plantation. The 17th century Puritans are seen as the ancestors of today's anti-intellectual Protestant sects, probably because of high school productions of Arthur Miller's The Crucible, a fictionalization of the Salem witch trials of 1692, an exercise in stupidity that took place more than 40 years after John Winthrop's death. In fact, today's evangelicals owe more to the Great Awakening revival movement of the 18th century, in which a believer's passion and feelings came to trump book learning. Subsequent Great Awakening sequels over the next 2 centuries brought forth recent innovations, including the ecstatic outburst known as speaking in tongues. There wasn't any speaking in tongues going on in Massachusetts Bay unless you count classical Greek. The Puritans had barely nailed together their rickety cabins when they founded Harvard so their future clergymen could receive proper theological training in Hebrew and other biblical languages. The magnitude of the Puritan devotion to higher education is on display in a letter Reverend Thomas Shepard, Jr. wrote to his son upon the lad's admission to Harvard. The elder Shepard was a graduate of Harvard's class of 1653. The father is full of advice on how his son can be a better student. Read history for wisdom and poetry for wit, admit when he doesn't understand something, etc. But Shepard's note is not so much a letter to his son as a love letter to learning, expressing how he hopes the boy will approach his studies with an appetite. He continues, "So I say to you, read, read. Something will stick in the mind. Be diligent, and good will come of it." Then he signs the letter Pater Tuus, your father, in Latin.
Now we're descending and everything's rushing. Now the wheel, now the wheel, now the wheel, now the wheel, now the wheel stops.
Harry Miller, a Harvard professor who became the 20th century's preeminent Puritan scholar, wrote, Puritanism was not an anti-intellectual fundamentalism. It was a learned, scholarly movement that required on the part of the leaders, and as much as possible from the followers, not only knowledge but a respect for the cultural heritage. Being good classicists, they read Latin and Greek poetry and tried their hands at composing verses of their own. The amount they wrote, even amid the labor of settling a wilderness, is astonishing. One of the Puritans' descendants, future President John Adams, studied at Harvard under Professor John Winthrop, our Winthrop's great-great-grandson. Writing the Constitution for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in 1778, Adams included a paragraph entitled The Encouragement of Literature, etc., which, his recent biographer David McCullough points out, was like no other declaration to be found in any constitution ever written until then or since. It reads, Wisdom and knowledge, as well as virtue, diffused generally among the body of the people, being necessary for the preservation of their rights and liberties. And as these depend on spreading the opportunities and advantages of education in various parts of the country, and among the different orders of the people, it shall be the duty of legislators and magistrates in all future periods of this Commonwealth to cherish the interests of literature and the sciences, and all seminaries of them, especially the university at Cambridge, public schools, and grammar schools in the towns. To encourage private societies and public institutions, rewards and immunities for the promotion of agriculture, arts, sciences, commerce, trades, manufactures, and a natural history of the country. To countenance and inculcate the principles of humanity and general benevolence, public and private charity, industry and frugality, honesty and punctuality in their dealings, sincerity, good humor, and all social affections and generous sentiments among the people. It was, in all, writes McCullough, a declaration of Adams' faith in education as the bulwark of the good society, the old abiding faith of his Puritan forebears. Compare that lovely insight to the typical Puritan spoilsport cartoon.
Johnny, 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 get away from my door. Say sayonara. You better not bother me no more. Say sayonara. 'Cause if you do, you're gonna be so sorry. My boyfriend's learning
Like any other American educated in public schools, my youthful encounters with New England colonials focused on Plymouth in 1620 and Salem in 1692. Which is to say that I read The Crucible in 11th grade, and I participated in elementary school Thanksgiving pageants in which children wearing construction paper pilgrim hats linked arms with others wearing Indian costumes consisting entirely of gift shop souvenir Sioux headdresses, and sang, "God bless America, and this land was made for you and me." But really, as a child, I learned almost everything I knew about American history in general and British colonials in particular from watching television situation comedies. The first time I realized this, I was attending a wedding in London. A friend of the groom's, an English novelist, cornered my American friend and me and asked us to name the British general from the Revolutionary War whom Americans hate the most. He needed one of the American characters in the novel he was working on to mention in passing our most loathed redcoat foe. Maybe Cornwallis, I said, adding that we don't really know the names of any of the British except for the American traitor Benedict Arnold. When the novelist asked why that was, my friend answered, because the Brady Bunch did an episode about him. Peter Brady had to play Benedict Arnold in a school play. True, I thought. The Bradys also taught us that the Robin Hood-like Jesse James was actually a serial killer, that the ancient indigenous religious culture of the Hawaiian Islands is not to be messed with, and that the Plymouth Pilgrims had a bleak first winter that was almost as treacherous to live through as that time Marcia got bonked in the face with her brother's football and her nose swelled up right before a big date. In fact, the Brady Bunch Puritan episode is an educational twofer, because its premise involves Greg Brady shooting a movie about the Mayflower Pilgrims using his family as actors. The viewer can learn about the hardships of colonial New England while at the same time learning about the hardships of directing an independent film. Greg's parents and the housekeeper Alice give too many notes on his screenplay. His brothers only want to play Indians, and all three of his bickering sisters demand to play the role of the Puritan girl Priscilla Alden. So Greg lets loose a tirade about artistic vision. He yells, "I want to write my own screenplay, design my own sets, choose my costumes, and pick the actors. Don't you see it's my project?" Greg's final product is full of factual holes, like the offhand remark alluding to the so-called first Thanksgiving that the Pilgrims made friends with the Indians and invited them to a feast, when it was actually the Indians who taught the agriculturally challenged Englishmen how to plant corn in the first place. But there is one interesting exchange that's a pretty accurate picture of a child coming to terms with American history. Bobby and Peter, who have agreed to play Pilgrims in some scenes and Indians in others, are dressed up in kitschy Plains Indian type garb. When Greg asks them if they know what to do, Peter answers, "Yeah, attack the fort." When Greg and their mother point out that these are actually friendly Indians, so there won't be an attack, Bobby asks, "Then what do you need Indians for?" "Bobby, the Indians were friendly at first," says Mr. Brady. "They didn't start fighting until their land was taken away." "Bobby, you mean the Pilgrims took away all the Indians' land?" "That's right," answers Mr. Brady, who immediately looks regretful at this point-blank lapse of patriotic forefather boosterism and adds, well, at first they didn't take much of it." "Then how about not much of an attack?" cracks Peter. And that's the end of the original sin question. After all, they have bigger logistical headaches at hand, like creating a realistic snowstorm using a box of breakfast cereal operated by one of the decidedly non-union kid brothers. From Mr. Ed to The Simpsons, there are actually a surprisingly number of sitcoms that have done episodes set in 17th century New England, even though 17th century New England is all situation and no comedy. I was in 3rd grade when I saw the Happy Days Thanksgiving episode. The whole cast was in Puritan garb. Joni Cunningham complains that being a pilgrim sure is a draggeth. The Fonz says things like, "Greeteth a mundo." Here is the moment that inspires the first epiphany I ever had about colonial New England. Joni leaves the room and her goody-goody brother Richie asks, "Father, are you letting her go out like that? Have you seen her skirt? It's up to her ankles." I remember sitting there watching that and realizing for the first of many times, oh, maybe the people who founded this country were kind of crazy. Later in the episode, it is revealed that the person who gave us Thanksgiving was not Squanto or Plymouth Governor William Bradford, but rather the Fonz. All the pilgrims were afraid of the Indians except Pilgrim Fonzie, who was their friend. Then, Joni gets her foot caught in one of Potsy's stupid beaver traps. That Potsy. Remember that thing Fonzie does with the jukebox where he whacks it with his fist and the music plays? Turns out that works on beaver traps too. They open right up. But he won't free Joni until everyone renounces their racism and acts nice to the Indians and invites them to dinner. Fonzie, he's the Martin Luther King of candied yams. Mostly sitcom Puritans are rendered in the tone I like to call the "boy, people used to be so stupid" school of history. The Witch produced not one, but 2 time travel witch trial episodes, one for each Darren. They're both diatribes about tolerance straight out of the Crucible, but with cornier dialogue and magical nose crinkles. The housewife/witch Samantha brings a ballpoint pen with her to 17th century Salem, and the townspeople think it's an instrument of black magic. So they try her for witchcraft and want to hang her. Check out those barbarian idiots with their cockamamie farce of a legal system, locking people up for fishy reasons and putting their criminals to death. Good thing Americans put an end to all that nonsense long ago. My point being, the amateur historian's next stop after "boy, people used to be so stupid" is "people, still stupid." I could look at that realization as a woeful lack of human progress, but I choose to find it reassuring. Watching Bewitched and the Brady Bunch again, I was flummoxed as to why they made such a big deal about Mayflower voyagers John and Priscilla Alden. Then I figured out that those two once loomed so large in the American mind, mostly because school children used to spend every November reading Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's 1858 love triangle poem about the Aldens called The Courtship of Miles Standish. The poem is full of all kinds of hooey, like calling Alden a scholar, even though in real life he was the guy on the Mayflower the Pilgrims hired as their barrel maker. Basically, he was in charge of the beer. And we should expect nothing less from Longfellow, who also poetically pumped up the importance of Paul Revere. There isn't that much different between tall tales that start "Listen, my children, and you shall hear," and "Here's the story of a man named Brady." In other words, Americans have learned our history from exaggerated popular art for as long as anyone can remember. Revolutionary War soldiers were probably singing fun but inaccurate folk songs about those silly Puritans to warm themselves by the fire at Valley Forge. Right before they defeated that godforsaken General Cornwallis, of course. Man, I hate that guy.
There's a lot of new words going around, as swinging and groovy as a surfing sound. So start with your words, begin with the new. If you listen to me, baby, gonna teach them to you. Are you ready? Are you ready?
Well, here are the new words now. Saggy.
That's a baggy with a tear in the back.
Buggy.
That's a 38 Cadillac.
Movie.
That's groovy when you're on the go.
Snicker.
That's a funny kind of TV show.
I say grave.
That's a wave that's bigger than big.
Carpet.
That's the father of a Beatle wig.
Boar's Hess.
That's a group that just don't swing. Swooms are the tunes that the Beach Boys sing. There's a lot of new words going around, as swinging and groovy as a surfing sound. So it's hard with the old words, in with the new. If you listen to me, baby, gonna teach them to you. Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready?
Well, here are some more words now. Fang.
That's a Dan in a new Mustang.
Tricks.
Are the chicks in a surfer gang.
Drear.
That's gear when your teacher feels low.
Mop.
That's a broom that just didn't grow.
I say smile.
That's a smile with a sneer on top.
Boot.
That's dad when he blows his top.
Melt.
That's a malt that looks like soup. Cookies cutting cookies is a Girl Scout troop. There's a lot of new words going around, as swinging and groovy as a surfing sound. So it's out with the old words, in with the new. If you listen to me, baby, gonna teach them to you. Are you ready? Are you ready?
Well, listen for the new words now. Fuzzle.
That's a beard on a surfer's chin.
Smosh.
That's a monster with a match left in.
Blonde.
That's a girl type 007.
Lip.
That's the other place they don't call heaven.
I say wicked.
That's a ticket that the old man pays.
A search through a sampling of American newspapers from the last few weeks for the word Puritan yields the following. An article on how much baby boomers are looking forward to retirement because they've always rolled their eyes at the Puritan work ethic since their turn-on, drop-out youths, and thus can't wait to spend their golden years traveling, volunteering, playing golf, and farming. The article really did say farming, which, I hate to break it to the flower children, is a pretty hard job. A financial analyst speaking of a recent crackdown on mortgage lending opines, transition from drunken sailor to being a Puritan was awfully fast. A profile of painter-turned-filmmaker Julian Schnabel claims Puritan critics always look down on the artist's charismatic joie de vivre. A sports columnist waxes happily that the national ardor for athletic events holds together our otherwise fragmented society in spite of our Puritan forefathers' deep distrust of any kind of play. I'm always disappointed when I see the word Puritan tossed around as shorthand for a bunch of generic, boring, stupid, judgmental killjoys. Because to me, they are very specific, fascinating, sometimes brilliant judgmental killjoys who rarely agreed on anything except that Catholics are going to hell. Certainly the Puritans believed and said and did many unreasonable things. That kind of goes with the territory of being born before the age of reason. Ponder all the cockamamie notions we moderns have been spared simply by coming into this world after an apple conked Sir Isaac Newton on the head. The Puritans' yearning for knowledge, especially their establishment of a college so early on, was self-correcting. In fact, it is Puritan father John Winthrop's great-great-grandson, the Harvard scientist who taught John Adams, who would be nicknamed the father of seismology. After an earthquake shook Boston in 1755 and prompted the usual religious flip-outs about the wrath of God, Professor Winthrop delivered an influential lecture at Harvard proposing the earthquake might have been caused by heat and pressure below the surface of the earth. With God's help, of course, but God comes off as an engineer instead of a hothead vigilante.
Also, from Wikipedia, Sarah Jane Vowell, born December 27, 1969, is an American author, journalist, humorist, and commentator. Often referred to as a social observer, Vowell has written several books and is a regular contributor to the radio program This American Life on Public Radio International. She was also the voice of Violet in the animated film The Incredibles and a short documentary, Vowelette, an essay by Sarah Vowell in the behind-the-scenes extras of The Incredibles DVD release. Vowell was born in Muskogee, Oklahoma. She has a fraternal twin sister, Amy. She earned a BA from Montana State University in 1993 and an MA at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in 1996. Vowell received the Music Journalism Award in 1996. Vowell is part Cherokee, about 1/8 on her mother's side and 1/16 on her father's side. According to Vowell, being at least a little Cherokee in northeastern Oklahoma is about as rare and remarkable as being a Michael Jordan fan in Chicago. She retraced the path of the forced removal of the Cherokee from the southeastern United States to Oklahoma, known as the Trail of Tears, with her twin sister Amy. This American Life chronicled her story on July 4th, 1998, devoting the entire hour to Sarah's work. Vowell currently lives in Chelsea, a residential neighborhood in Manhattan. She cannot swim, is afraid of heights, and does not drive a car. She usually enlists the aid of her friends and family to drive her to historical sites when doing research. She has celiac sprue, a condition in which the body has an autoimmune reaction to gluten. And I'll see you all next week.